perspective. The plan is for each of our panelists, who I'll introduce in a minute, to briefly describe some of the work they've been doing in alternative grains, and then mostly leave time for discussion. So as we go, if you have questions, please type them in the chat. If it makes sense to pause and answer one of those questions while one of the speakers is talking, we'll do that, but then otherwise we'll hopefully leave a lot of time at the end to direct what we talk about based on what you're interested in learning about. So hopefully you'll have an idea of the kind of things we as presenters are capable of talking about, and you can direct your questions there. So I will start us off and introduce our panel here. Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
Fantastic. So, talking about minor cereals in the northeast of England, we're going to touch on a range of different things, but I just wanted to start by highlighting we're mostly going to be focusing on spelt and buckwheat, which are both hold crops. Spelt is a hold wheat. Buckwheat is a pseudo cereal that you'll hear more about later. And again, we are going to talk about other things, but just to point out, this is kind of the focus for this particular chat. And then our panelists. So I'm Amelia Magistrali. I can tell you more about my expertise a bit later. We also have Andrew Wilkinson, who is a farmer, miller, and researcher based at Gilchesters Organics. We also have Israel Dominguez, who is based in Angola at the minute, but recently finished a PhD on pseudo cereals, buckwheat, and quinoa at Newcastle University. And then Rhys Hugill is a brewer based outside of Newcastle, Donzoko Brewing. And unfortunately, because of scheduling, he's not able to join us. He may come for the discussion at the end. It's unclear, but he had the foresight to create a presentation that we have to share, a recording. So we'll do that. And then we also have Stephen Jacobs, who has graciously joined us to help facilitate our discussion, as he works for Organic Farmers and Growers and is a big part of the UK Grain Lab. So is very interested in localized and regional supply chains for grains. So yeah, we're each going to kind of introduce our own role in this. Again, share your questions if you have them, and then Stephen's going to lead us in discussion.
I'm Andrew Wilkinson. Can you pop up the first slide, Amelia? Thank you. I live and work at Gilchesters Farm in Northumberland, and I think really the overriding sort of aim of what we do here is to preserve the value of the landscape within our community. And I've thought long and hard about that over many years. And it's not just the economic value of the landscape. I think that probably comes at the end. Our real aim is to preserve the cultural identity of our landscape, the nutritional value of the landscape, and in that, through our organic farming, the environmental value of our landscape, and then by employing people to do what we do, and to keep that the cereal production and our economic activity as local as possible. So local cereal short food chain production is what we're about. So supplying home bakers, artisan bakeries, and as we'll discuss with some of the other cereals that we produce for other end users up here in the Northeast. So how do we do that? We have gone through 20 years of organic mixed farming, and along that journey we have been promoting so a diverse use of cereal production. Spelt, rye, emmer and einkorn feature very heavily in our production system, and primarily we grow those for our stone milling process. We have an on-farm flour mill, and really the farming of those cereals is to produce grains with as high a nutritional value as possible. How have we achieved that? I've worked in association with Newcastle University for nearly 20 years as a researcher. So my own PhD is through the work I did in collaboration with Newcastle University 20 years ago. And as a business, we have been industrial partners on a number of huge pan-European research collaborations. And we do those trials on farm as part of the research project. So everything that we do for enhancing that value in the landscape has come from scientific cereal and soil research trials, both on our farm and other partners in the trial. Next slide, please, Amelia. So what's been I just really want to briefly touch on the background of that research, and then I will just throw up a few very small examples of where that work's focused on, and that will just enable you as the listeners to this to field some questions to us throughout the presentation. So really the upshot of our research has been to establish a really solid platform that soil nutrition is absolutely the basis for cereal nutrition. And this is enhanced by the varieties that we select and choose. And really 20 years ago, I asked the question, are seeds available on the variety list, the UK variety list, the right things to be growing under organic conditions? Is it just modern variety list cereals under organic conditions equals organic farming? And I questioned that, and now we have a much broader understanding of the variety selection that's out there that is much better suited for organic production. And plant breeding over the last 20 years has really taken that on board and brought a lot of different plant architecture and characteristics to the plants that they're breeding for cereal production. One of the things we established very early on was that the modern plant breeding, because it was focusing on yield at all cost, and that yield at all cost agricultural practice had eroded cereal nutrient density, particularly in wheat, with this sink source relationship between what the plant assimilates from photosynthesis and where it stuffs it in its plant. And once you bring the straw height down and you really impact on yield, there is this trade-off. Whether you're making furniture or growing cereals, once you go from quality to quantity, you can't mass produce quality, and that trade-off for going for yield, we now know, has resulted in a reduction in nutrient density, particularly in wheats. And we've looked at that in rye and spelt and other crops as well. And there are sort of two aspects to the soil nutrition that we've looked at. We've just published a recent paper on phenolics in plants, so antioxidants and their antioxidant generating capacity. And there's a very strong link between the variety that you use, whether it's a tall or a short-strawed modern hybrid, and the sort of soil fertility you use. So if you're using composted green waste with a tall-strawed sort of heritage style wheat, you will get a better uptake of and production of phenolics in the plant than is produced by a modern short straw hybrid in conventional chemical farming environments. So that's a recent one we've just published. And then more recently with spelt and rye, we identified there was a very strong characteristic in a reduction in spelt's nutritional density because of its cross-breeding with wheat now to improve its yield capacity, particularly in Germany, which is the major spelt producer in Europe. And that's tainting the purity, if you like, and the nutritional delivery of spelt. So we've picked up on that in the UK, and Gilchesters have developed a true spelt logo to identify varieties that are pure spelt varieties and those that are modern hybrids. I'll briefly touch, Amelia, if I can, just on the next slide, and then I'll hand over. So the last project that we were involved in was the Healthy Minor Cereals project, European one. Amelia did a lot of the number crunching for her PhD on the spelt and rye production that we trialed here. But I just want to really just throw out to the audience that the data that we've collected and analysed on the nutritional value of these 200 sessions of oat that we studied, 54 rye, the Igalops, the wild wheats, spelt, emmer and einkorn. We have some fantastic data, and I've got the slides to share with you later if we want to go down this route on nutritional delivery. Links in very closely with Patrick Holden and his team's presentation yesterday on nutrition, so that'd be quite nice to link that in. So we've looked at antioxidant capacity in these minor cereals, really, really fascinating. And we've looked at zinc and iron delivery of these cereals, given the World Health Organization's identifying major depletion in the world human diet in zinc and iron. So we've analysed that as well. So that's kind of what we're about. That's what we do technically, and we deliver those nutritionally dense cereals to a wide audience of bakers and end users. Okay, Amelia, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'll just...
Amelia, can we get the links to this research? People in the chat are asking.
Yes, I'll put the papers that we've published, I can put on my website on the research tab on Gilchesters Organics.
So I'll put that link in the chat and then people can go there.
Okay.
Cool.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to now talk about the research I was involved with, so including healthy minor cereals, which Andrew was just talking about. My PhD was based on looking at different spelt and rye varieties under different fertility conditions, and that was part of Healthy Minor Cereals and the Sustainable Intensification platform. I'm really going to focus mostly on spelt, but we can talk about rye in the discussion if you're very interested. And this also ties into a recent project that I just finished that was a knowledge transfer partnership in collaboration with Newcastle University and Coastal Grains, which was about developing supply chains for alternative grains. So first, this is just a kind of brief overview of what I did with Healthy Minor Cereals. We had mainly two trials, a factorial field trial, which was at Nafferton Farm, the university research farm, and that took place over 2 years, looking at 4 different varieties of spelt and 4 of rye. And then we also did farmer participatory trials. And here I've just presented some of the spelt results in particular. So just grain yield, protein, which is an important characteristic that we look at in terms of nutrition, but also for the quality of the flour for use in baking. And then Hagberg falling number is the last characteristic, which is key for millers and bakers. It gives an indication of alpha amylase activity in the grain, which ultimately contributes to how a structure of a bread will develop. So it's especially important when you're looking at hard wheat varieties and any kind of bread making flour, which is all of the varieties included in the trial were designed for that. So the main thing just to kind of point out from these brief results is we did see variety differences in terms of which varieties were more suited to a Northeast climate. So the Oberkummer Rotkorn variety is a landrace spelt, which Andrew has been growing for years, and it performed really well in terms of yield in both trials. As you can see on the farmer participatory trial, We did strip plots, which were a bit trickier to manage exactly as you would want, just because of how they're designed. So there is something we can have a discussion about how to effectively do farmer participatory research in the discussion if you'd like.
And all day doing that.
But in protein overall is high for spelts, and then also in terms of quality, there was this variety Rubiota did quite well in terms of Hagberg falling number, and falling number is really determined by conditions pre-harvest. So if it's very wet pre-harvest, grain can end up starting to sprout, which ultimately decreases your Hagberg falling number. But there are particular varieties that have essentially resilience in terms of their ability to maintain a high Hagberg falling number under poor conditions. The other thing I wanted to touch on, which Andrew alluded to, is the idea that spelt is an improved source of nutrients compared to common wheat. And we've been seeing in research over time that the modern wheat varieties, as we've bred for high yield, we've lost nutritional content. That's particularly true for zinc and iron. I've included just some figures of what you typically see in commercially available wheat flours. There is a big range by variety and environment. Andrew can tell you there's lots of wheat varieties that we maybe don't grow as much that still have higher nutritional content than these examples. But you can also see from the Healthy Miner Cereals trial, spelt had a much higher iron and zinc content than what we typically see in wheat. And in particular, that landrace variety, Oberkummer Rotkorn, had the highest nutritional content in terms of these nutrients. The other thing I'm just going to briefly touch on is phenolic content, which are generally considered beneficial for human health. We like to compare them between species and varieties, and folks consider that spelt has higher nutritional content overall, but really what has been found in other studies and what was true in this case is that environment and climate, so like differences between year and then also differences between soil conditions in different locations, actually has a much stronger effect on phenolic content than necessarily the variety difference. So we especially saw a big difference between years in phenolic content. Of course, we had a higher yield in 2015, so it might be a dilution effect, but generally, when it comes to that, we weren't focusing exclusively on nutrients, so it's hard to say, but phenolic content is different based on year and environment rather than variety. So I also just want to touch on the more recent project I've been working on, which is much more based on supply chain development. So this was a knowledge transfer partnership between Newcastle University and Coastal Grains. Coastal Grains is a farmer-owned grain storage cooperative. So it has farmer members that store grains in one location. Basically, a group of the farmer members were interested in trying to grow some different crops. Spelt was kind of included in their mind. They also had interest in buckwheat. So the project was designed to identify what crops could successfully be grown commercially with access to regular buyers and ultimately have a supply chain in the UK. Spelt was established pretty early on, and that's been kind of the main success story of this project. So the table I've shown just shows you the number of farms, the amount of total hectarage, and then the tonnage sold over the 3 years of the project, which just ended this year, and then also what's planned for next year. So you can see there's been growth overall, both organic and conventionally, from farmer members. And the main reason that's worked is there's a customer in the Northeast, Craggs & Co., who started investing in spelt equipment and are increasingly looking for spelt producers. So the timing of the project actually worked out quite well to match up to someone in the local spelt supply chain. We also tried buckwheat, mostly driven by grower interest, and ultimately decided to pick varieties that could be whole milled to produce something similar to what's grown in France and milled for flour to be used in galettes or savory crepes. And we've had some success, and this is a direction we can, if anyone's very interested in buckwheat and buckwheat processing, we can talk about it a lot, but we did successfully grow buckwheat as a spring crop. and Andrew actually milled some that went to Hadmadad. Hadmadad has been a big partner in trying to establish a customer base and distribute it in the UK. And their customers are very interested in just setting up a consistent supply chain for not just organic buckwheat, which now mostly exists, but also trying to find other outlets. And yeah, the main limitation is being able to dehull it, and there'd be more opportunities once we can do that regularly in the UK. But I'll leave additional details for later in the discussion on that one. And I'll pass on to Israel now, who's going to talk to you a bit more about buckwheat. Israel, I think you need to unmute.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Hi, Amelia. And thank you for handing over to me. I'm Israel Domingos. I've recently finished my PhD at Newcastle University, where I was looking at pseudo cereals, mainly buckwheat and quinoa, based on the facts that we can see a lot of health problems related with the kinds of foods we eat and the way we produce them, as Andrew pointed out, the link between the health of the soils and the end product. I mean, like the nutritional quality of the crops we're growing. So related to buckwheat, the main issue is about the celiac diseases that is affecting many people throughout the world. And so we were looking at the alternative to find to see how we can, whether we could grow buckwheat in northeast of England, because we know that buckwheat is a kind of a warm crop, likes warmer temperatures. So in my study, what I was looking at is the possibility to grow buckwheat under northeast climatic conditions, because we know that it's a very cooler environment. And we have we can see two sides of growing buckwheat. Either buckwheat or quinoa is we have the agronomic benefits and the health benefits of introducing buckwheat and quinoa in the UK landscape, because we know these two crops are relatively new to the agricultural landscape of UK. And the main aspects of buckwheat and quinoa is that they have a relative high nutrient use efficiency, and they have low fertilizer requirements. Specifically with buckwheat, we have a relative high competition against wheat. And we know that it's not across all wheats, but there's some specificity to this competition against wheat. And when we grow buckwheat, we can increase pollinator species where we have buckwheat specifically. On the other side, we have the health benefits of growing or consuming buckwheat and quinoa, because we know that both of these two crops are suitable for gluten-free products. That this is one of the key aspects of the pseudo cereals compared to other crops, which are also suitable for gluten-free products. And buckwheat and quinoa can have a relative high protein content, and they have cholesterol lowering properties. And both of these two crops have mineral density, specifically with zinc and iron. And we know the problems with zinc and iron deficiency, what's causing lots of problems with related to chronic diseases such as hypertension, anemia, and all these together. But as I said, the study at Newcastle was focusing on the possibility to grow these two crops, but we had the major limitations with this is that specifically buckwheat has an indeterminate growth habit, and there are few varieties that are available for growing in the UK. And we know that for organic growers, we have the problem with weed control measures. Like, as I said, it sounds a bit contradictory when I say they have a relative competition against weeds, but there are other weeds that they can grow alongside with these crops. And since we don't have any recommended weed control measure for these two crops, so it's a bit of. Go to the next slide, please. So in our study, we examined the effects of sowing dates and fertilization on the performance of these two crops. And what we got in terms of yield, here what I'm presenting is the potential. From some of the varieties, we could get about 1.7 tons per hectare, and quinoa we could get 2.24, but the average yield across 3 years and across varieties, it was about 1 ton per hectare, which is the global average. And we know that there is the French variety, which is the highest, I believe, I think is the highest variety we have seen, is La Hope. Is the yield is about 3 to 4 tons per hectare. And as I said, in general, buckwheat and quinoa showed a relative high concentrations of iron and zinc to most of the major cereals such as wheat, maize, and rice. And some of this, particularly total antioxidants, was approximately 2 to 3 times higher than rice and maize in the study we have carried out at Nafton Farm. So basically, we know that there is little or no commercial production of buckwheat in the UK, and in general, much of the buckwheat production in the UK, except where it's grown as a cover crop, has not been successful because the farmers have found it unattractive for commercial production and for human consumption because of the growth habit. You can have in the same plant, you can have ripened seeds and you can have grain seed, which make it a bit difficult to determine when is the best time to harvest the crop. And in addition to the growth habit, we have the low yield that most of them they have obtained from growing buckwheat, and the lack of recommended agrochemical, as I've said, as I've pointed out previously. And despite all of the potential we can see from a nutritional point of view, so we think that a better understanding of the effects of local agroecological conditions on growth and development of buckwheat and quinoa remains an important task, which would aid UK farmers, not only UK, but we talk about the northeast of England, with robust evidence-based information so that they can grow buckwheat. Despite the relative low yields, there is a potential to develop this UK supply chain of buckwheat and quinoa with the relatively high grain quality, as you can see from the slide, and compared to other studies we see from, let's say, about cereals, in specifically wheat and rice. Both crops show clear potential, specifically for low input organic growth, but there is the task to develop this in terms of a wide genetic genetic screen programs, because as I said, there are few varieties available to grow, and improvements in plant breeding in terms of developing more tolerant or more cold tolerant varieties because of the low temperatures we can see in the northeast of England. And last but not least is we need to find a better ways of harvesting, because of the small seeds of buckwheat and quinoa, you can have high seed losses through a mechanized harvesting. So this is a really I think is an issue when we talk about growing buckwheat and quinoa and trying to have a mechanized harvesting, and we need to consider that. In addition that, because of the lower temperatures, you can have at the time of harvest, you can have a really cold temperatures, which may hamper the. That's it, Amelia.
Great, thank you, Israel. So our last presentation, I hope you'll forgive us and Reese. Reese is unable to join us at the minute, but he produced a video because he's been brewing with some of the grains that we've been talking about. So I will stop sharing this and then pull up the video. And also because Reese isn't here, we've given him a little bit extra time. So it's a little under 10 minutes. Sorry, my screen has lots of windows up, so it'll take me a minute. But I'll start playing, and if you can just give me a thumbs up that you can hear the audio, that would be great.
Hi everyone, I'm Reese from Donzoko. We make unfiltered lagers and continental style beers in the northeast in Hartlepool. As a small brewery, I'm a user of grain, not necessarily an expert, so I'm sorry if I get things wrong. Forgive me. So as a small brewery, we kind of have a craft ethos where we try and make the final beer in the glass as delicious as we can, not necessarily as cheaply as we can or as efficiently as we can. It's all about the final taste and the quality of that beer. And because we're so small, we can do these experiments and try something a bit out there without risking too much. So large breweries that make 100,000 litres of beer at a time, they don't want to try something new and decide they need to start again, whereas I can, and I can make something over and over again in smaller batches and try and get everything nailed down as best we can. So the main ingredients in beer are water, which is the substrate which everything is contained inside. Grain, usually malted barley is the main grain, which provides the body of the beer, the sweetness, the sugars, the foam. It's kind of the heart of the beer. And then hops provide bitterness, aroma, flavor, and storage capabilities. And the yeast provides the alcohol, the most important part, from the sugars that come from the grain. So malted barley is the main, as mentioned, is the main grain in beer produced today, and that's for a variety of reasons. Partially because it's easier to malt than other things. The husks on the barley provide great use in the brew house, in the production process. That separation process is aided by the barley malt having the husk, which can filter out things you don't want. It doesn't cause things to get blocked up. You can rinse the grains, called sparging, really easily to chase out all those sugars. And it makes brewing a lot easier than using other grains. So as a brewer, the most kind of important thing is the form those grains come in. Like brewers like to use other grains. They've been used since beer was a thing for different properties. So if you imagine like wheat beer, like German wheat beer, like Erdinger, you pour that, it has a lovely thick creamy head. That's because of the wheat. You can use rye for like the spicy flavor, maize for the amount of sugar it gives. Like it kind of, every grain has a potential use. But the form those grains come in is important for the brewer. If the grain's unmalted, then there's a cap of how much you can use, because it doesn't have the enzymes to convert those starches into sugars. You need to rely on the extra enzymes that are in your base malt, say that if that's barley. So things like in the German wheat beer, that would be 50% malted wheat, because that wheat's malted as the enzymatic activity to convert the starches into sugars. So if you're using unmalted grains, there's a cap on how much you can use. Alternative grains are useful, but it's about using them in a way that's going to work with your process. So using raw grains, sometimes you can get problems just raw grains, just as they are crushed. The enzymes finding the starches and getting access to that to convert into sugars, you're not going to get as good as an efficiency. If you use flaked grain, like flaked wheat, that's going to be a lot easier. Flaked wheat's quite popular in very small doses, say like 5% of the total weight. So I wanted to make a Belgian style pale ale. So light Belgian beers, usually a quite low percentage. So the one I chose, Graft, is 4%. But I wanted a nice thick, creamy body. So it was good to use some unmalted grains. I was probably going to use flaked wheat, which is quite popular in beers like Hoegaarden, like a wheat beer. And I was talking to Amelia, and she had some Spelt and some rye left from her PhD, and I was like, I can put that in some beer. So I brewed the first batch of Graft with some just raw Spelt and raw rye, and I was really pleased. I was like really blown away with the body I got from the beer, and the head retention and the foam quality was really good. Some nice spiciness from the rye and like a nuttiness from the Spelt. I was really pleased with how the beer turned out, so it kind of got me into looking at more alternative grains and using those in different beers. And I still brew Graft to this day. I use flaked Spelt from Craggs & Co., which makes things a bit easier for me. And rye, also just regular rye as well. So these are kind of core beers I have. So most Helles and Garden beer are both 100% barley malt. Indie Graft, that's a version of the previous beer Graft, but with buckwheat instead of rye. I just thought I'd try out using buckwheat and see if I could pick out the flavour differences and how it was using in the brew house. It was a bit disconcerting to see all like little black things like almost float in the mash. It's very strange. I wasn't used to it as a brewer. You'd usually see that if you were making stout. So I was worried the beer was going to come out brown. Yeah, but it was really delicious using the buckwheat for the first time. Definitely won't be the last. I'd like to use it in a much larger percentage. I believe also produces it has a compound called caprylic acid is produced with certain yeasts interacting with the buckwheat, which can give you a nice kind of like barnyardy funky flavor. And that is esterified in the fermentation process from the wild yeast. That can produce like a pineapple component as well, which I'm excited to dive into that. My number one selling beer is Big Foam now, which is a Rustic Lager. So it's lager traditionally in Germany. Since the 1500s, it's by law, it's had to be 100% barley malt. Originally because they wanted to conserve the wheat for use in making flour and bread. So that you can't call a beer a lager beer if you put flaked wheat in it in Germany. This beer, Big Foam, is barley malt with like 15% flaked Spelt from Craggs & Co. And I was really blown away. I would notice that the foam quality on the Graft is really good, and I kind of wanted to amp that up quite a bit by using a bit more Spelt in a beer that was highly carbonated like a lager, and that's why it's called Big Foam. When you pour it, you get a really big rocky head on the top. It looks pretty good, but also the Spelt gives a nice nuttiness and good malt quality, malty kind of nutty quality to the beer. And I'm a big fan of using Spelt now in that beer. So a lot of these things are traditions. where things haven't been used before, and using them in new beers. So I couldn't call that beer in Germany, but which is it's crazy to me. And it's nice to use. Like, a lot of these beers have ingredients in from all around the world. It's nice to use local suppliers and know that I can just drive down the road and buy some Spelt that was grown in a field, like 5 miles from the brewery, and use it in the beer. That's kind of cool to me, especially when like the hops from that beer come from Australia. So it's nice to have at least something that's grown locally. If the Spelt was malted, you would probably see a bigger uptake in breweries using it in larger quantities. Say to substitute for like a wheat beer, you could use 50% of your grain bill. Could be the malted Spelt. I do use malted Spelt sometimes, and I get it from a maltsters in Germany, in Heidelberg, called Best Malts. And if there was a UK alternative, even as like a small scale for malting some of these grains, as a brewer, that'd be really cool to experiment with and use them in bigger quantities to try and pull out more of those flavors. So there is definitely a demand increasingly for things that are more kind of, I guess, like tied to the land and the farm. And if I can explain to someone, oh yeah, the flavor from this beer was because of the Spelt that was grown down the road. That's a cool thing to say as well on the can and explain to consumers. People like that kind of stuff now, and it makes delicious beer. Hey-ho. So if anyone's got any questions about, like, I guess, brewing or what kind of brewers are looking for in these grains, I guess you can give me an email on reese@donzoko.uk. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully I'll make it some other sessions. I'm really sorry I couldn't be there today. I hope the discussion goes well. Okay, thanks everyone.
So thanks to Reese for doing that for us. And yeah, he's very happy to talk about this. So please send him an email if you're really keen on the brewing side of things. But otherwise, we're now going to open up for more general discussion. And I've noticed we've probably got some things to catch up on the chat, but I'm going to turn us over to Stephen, who's going to be our moderator.
That was really good. The video worked. Well done. And he speaks well, I think. So, yeah, we'll invite some conversation. If people want to open your mics and cameras, don't speak all at once. But if you're not a panelist and you've got something to say, please raise your hand. One of the questions that hasn't been answered, we could start with that, actually, which is, what are populations? And I would add to that, what are they for? So, Andrew, you responded to say that you were happy to take that on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Miriam. I was asked this question a lot. In fact, I posted a little answer on my Instagram post, Northumbrian Miller. So if you want a sort of little synopsis of that, that's where it is. In essence, I think a population week really started in its modern concept by Martin Wolf, who was a researcher and a farmer at Wakelins, which was the name of his farm. And if you Google Wakelins agroforestry, you'll see the amazing work that man did up until he passed away very recently. And he looked at trying to get a compromise between the sort of the yield at all cost varieties, single varieties in a field, and those that were growing for quality, which reduced the yield, but obviously reduction in yield, increase in quality. And he took 20 varieties and he crossbred every single one variety with every single other variety. And at the end, the seeds were genotypically the same. So they had the same genetic background because every one seed grain or variety had been crossbred with every single other variety. But because they had different plant architecture, so their phenotypical expression, when you grew that crop out in the field, it expressed itself completely differently from seed to seed throughout the field. So you had tall, short, horned, whatever was in the architecture of the original 20 wheat plants expressed itself in that way in the field. He started that in 2006. We grew out one of the first trial plots for that, and it's called the YQ population, so yield and quality function. You'll see that there are a number of local bakeries through the UK Grain Lab who are milling and baking with the YQ flour, and it has gained a real popular traction in the artisan baking world. Martin Wolf, because he grew it as a population wheat, and it had no one single variety that a plant breeder could attach ownership to in the end population, threw up all sorts of very interesting problems for the EU seed purity laws and ownership, because no one plant breeder could claim plant breeder rights on the population that Martin had produced. And actually, he focused the questions and changed the law remarkably. And the EU then said, well, we need to have parameters of what is a population wheat. And in EU law now, a population wheat has to be a crossbreeding of a minimum of 6 varieties. They have to be all bred with each other, and therefore those minimum 6 varieties that you use, the greater the variation in the plant architecture, the greater the different expression in the field, so the greater the phenotypical expression. So genotypically the same, all bred cross each other to even out the differently phenotypically. That's EU law. What are the advantages of that? And anything else that anybody grows that has different plants in the same field is a mixture. If they haven't been crossbred, it's a mixture. So if you've got a handful of different single varieties and you sow them, it's not a population because they are not genetically the same. And that mixture, if you've got different single varieties of wheat or spelt or anything else, because you've sown that single variety in the field, you are liable to the plant breeder for the royalties due on that seed and that single variety grown in your field. So that's very clear in European law. What are the benefits? Until 2007, we really didn't see any real benefit of a population wheat sown against a single variety field in the same location, until the sort of weather weirding really started kicking in 2007-8. Once we started getting these heavy downpours of rain in August, July, pre-harvest for the north, but absolutely mid-harvest in the south of England, the population wheats actually started to express real robustness in their defense of the weather against the natural accumulation of their resources in the ear and in the grain. So the things that Amelia discussed earlier about Hagbo falling number and for me as a miller, baking quality, the resilience of that population crop, because no one single variety or single expression in that population was dominant, you didn't get a dominant loss as you would with a single variety. If something went wrong in a single variety, it went wrong across the whole field. The population one, the average is better than the averages of the single in a bad year. And through 2012, awful year, 2013, bad year, 2017, bad year, last year, awful, this year, August, again, really poor conditions. Population wheats have done really remarkably well because they average out far better than the single varieties. So we are now trialing population wheats from Germany, 2 of them, 2 German plant breeders. Steve Jones, the bread lab in the USA, he donated to me his Skagit Valley 1109 population wheat, which we're bulking up for UK use, and then we've got a new one from Anders Borgen, who is an amazing plant breeder in Denmark, and he's produced a Danish corn called popcorn, nicely, which is this population wheat. So that is in essence why we do it. That's where it's come from, and that's technically the difference between a mixture and a population.
Excellent, Andrew. Thank you very much. And thank you to Miriam for that question. Sorry, I didn't name check you earlier. One of the things Andrew mentioned was the late great Martin Wolf and Wakelins. I put a link in the chat. That happens to be a link to their website and to Martin's last paper, but there's a plethora of information there. Also here on the call today is Charlotte Bickler, who heads up knowledge transfer for the Organic Research Centre, who Martin worked under. So we can pick up some of that stuff later. And Charlotte's asked a question, but before I get to that question, Amelia, your position, you've been working with Andrew on research, but you're also working with Coastal Grains. Is that a KTP? Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is and why it is?
Yeah, so a KTP stands for Knowledge Transfer Partnership, and it's a scheme from Innovate UK. So it basically, the idea is to connect a commercial partner with a research institution. Usually it's a university, but not always, and place essentially a research associate in a company to look at a specific problem's a bad word, but to focus on a particular area to benefit the company and also produce research outputs on behalf of the research institution. Lots of times they happen in engineering and computing, but they also pop up in agriculture. So in that role, the project was identified by Coastal Grains and by its farmer members in it originally. And some of the Coastal Grains members had actually participated in the farmer participatory trial component of my PhD. So Newcastle University has had a bit of a relationship with Coastal Grains beforehand. So they came together to come up with a proposal to have an associate placed within the company to specifically focus on the commercial side of this. So through research, and Andrew himself has shown that you can grow these different alternative crops in the Northeast, but the issue is then, can you scale it so that multiple farmers can grow it and have an outlet for it? And if there already is a supply chain, can we tap into it? What else needs to be developed for particular crops? So yeah, I basically did a bunch of research about different things we could try growing. I looked at quinoa, I looked at camelina seed at one point. I looked at kind of the things we've been talking about, spelt, rye, buckwheat, and then the next step is to figure out who's using it in the UK and would they buy it from the UK and what form does it need to be in. And spelt, there's still a bit of a barrier for just anyone to just try growing spelt and assume that they're going to have an outlet. Like you do need to dehull spelt to get it into the human consumption market. And there are increasingly folks who have the capability to do that in the UK. So there's more opportunities for something like spelt. And we were able to kind of figure out that supply chain pretty early on. Something like buckwheat, as Israel talked about, as I've now seen with farmers, it can be grown in the UK climate, especially as a spring crop. And lots of farmers are familiar with it as a cover crop anyway. But it's the processing side of things where you run into trouble. You can put it through a spelt dehuller, but it will get smashed to bits. It needs a different kind of equipment and really a whole different way of distributing it. So like in parts of France and actually in China, buckwheat is processed a lot more efficiently, and there's a machine that will dehull it, but it also, a key part is separating it, because you're not going to dehull everything on the first go. So you separate it and then you'll send things that haven't actually been dehulled back through the dehuller, whereas then you can separate out what's been dehulled and separate the stuff that's accidentally been crushed. And sure, that can go for flour, but then your whole groats can go another way. But the reality of end users in the UK is that they're used to buying dehulled buckwheat from China, from Russia, from parts of Europe. So me running around with buckwheat with its hulls on saying, hi, do you want this? Wasn't working out great. And we're now at a point where certainly it can be direct milled, and Andrew has done that and can speak to how you can do that directly. We've also at Coastal set up a small, I would describe it as dehulling, but we're still crushing it. We're just not crushing it as hard. And then you can sieve it out into something that's been partially crushed, and then that product can get milled further. So you basically put it through a roller mill, sieve out the portions you want versus what you don't want. And we've been working with Hadmedad on sending them something that's at least been partially processed, which proves the point that we can do it in this country. The difficulty is that Coastal Grains is not really a company that specializes in processing things. It's a grain storage facility. So their capacity to actually do that at scale is going to be very different. But it seems like the opportunity now is to direct mill buckwheat for Hadmedads and other companies that are interested. And there are bakers that are interested in using buckwheat flour. But to actually dehull it is going to require a bit more investment from someone who's really keen to produce a dehulled buckwheat, really.
That then touches, thank you, Amelia, that touches on Charlotte's question. Charlotte Bickler's put a question to say, identify one key enabler that would encourage wider uptake and ultimately the benefits being shared more widely. Or she says, do you think that they can only ever exist as a niche product? And then apologises for putting a big question. I think one of the things, because it came up in the chat earlier, John Thorns was asking about equipment for dehulling. Andrew was talking about being able to use milling stones, which I think is something Tim Sellers is still doing in Yorkshire. But is it that we need, on the one hand, I'll put it to you, a farm hacking aversion. So like Andrew was saying, you can get direct milling buckwheat if you're careful enough, and you can look at dehulling by getting actual millstones and aspirating it or aerating it. And do you go for investment to get proper equipment? So for instance, the Buckwheat family at Rushall in the southwest of England have a dehulling unit. How would we see that go? Is that a research funding issue? Is it a commercial issue? Or is it both?
Do you want me to start that off?
Yes, please.
Well, I think Charlotte's initial question is, kind of what are the barriers to entry, and how do we, these things from the 20, 30 years of my working life trying to establish a small business to provide this stuff, I found it's entirely customer driven. The demand for the product demands your attention to solve the bottleneck in your production as the demand increases. It's as simple as that. Once when I produced the first crop of Spelt 25 years ago, God, I had to work so hard to sell that first ton. And 10 years later, the demand picked up, and another 10 years later, the huge demand. So we built in the dehulling to match the demand that we had, and as the pressure grew on us to deliver more, we had to solve that problem. So it's always been demand driven, and I think the change in our landscape from a farming community in the UK, we went into recession back in 98, 99, and that dot-com bubble didn't see us out of it because of government intervention in the economy, and we just slid further into recession, and we had to find alternative marketing ideas, whether you had as a dairy went into ice cream or cheese, or and for me as a cereal producer, went into flour. But the real breakthrough for us, and I think we started as producers in the UK, as farmers, having this wonderful range of produce that was really only farmers market available. The breakthrough from my own perception was when these young chefs coming out of university with a degree that had no place in the workplace, and they went into restaurants and just to make ends meet, and these became the 25, 27, 28, 30-year-old chefs now. God, they're passionate. They really understand, and they're the ones that looked out across the UK landscape and said, "Ooh, charcuterie over there near Wales, and ooh, flour over there in Northumberland," and they just drew all these ingredients into their kitchens. And because they like to celebrate it on the menu, that was the greatest advertising for all of us. As they really sold UK fine provenance production, and that was the start of the demand. And that was really that is the way forward. It's entirely customer driven, and we're so lucky to have a UK customer base now that really embraces homegrown. And it'd be interesting to see, after Brexit, where those barriers to entry preserve our nutrient-rich production systems. But wait and see.
Yeah, thank you. Well, unless the others have got something to add to that, I would say that leads on to Brexit, not Brexit questions, COVID questions. Because one of the things is the elasticity or otherwise of these systems. So Israel, when you go to farmers and say you're going to grow these novel crops, I can't imagine that they're going to go, yeah, that's great, I'll put my whole farm into it, because it's too big a risk, no? And do you think that there's pressures like pandemics sometimes when, okay, maybe some people say they don't want any more risk, but maybe some people are willing to try something different? You're on mute, by the way.
Yes, I think that there's a risk in growing these crops in the Northeast because of the climatic conditions. But in any ways, we need to find alternatives. As I said, there are lots of agronomic benefits from growing these two crops, not just from the nutritional side, but the agronomic benefits that you can get from growing these crops. I think it's worth the risk you're taking to growing them. And as I said, the most important thing is to identify the most appropriate sowing date, so that you don't want to face, let's say, the worst conditions, let's say the lower temperatures, because as I said, it takes about 150 and 190 days to actually go from sowing to maturity in Northeast England. So first of all, you need to identify the most appropriate sowing date and the suitable variety, so that you can shorten the cycle, so that, let's say, up to some September, for instance, you can actually harvest your crops. One case was we can point out is, for instance, in 2018, because of the warmer temperature we experienced in the UK, and we could harvest early September or mid-September, but the problem was the dry spell we faced in that year, and the yields were really low in that year compared to the previous year, 2017. But there is a lot of benefits, agronomic benefits, from growing buckwheat and quinoa. So I would say, let's go step by step, trying to introduce new crops as more information is available in terms of varieties, in terms of agronomic management, so that other farmers, UK growers, can come on board. And some of them, they are a bit skeptical because there are little information about this. And I think one of the things that Amelia is doing is really important to sell out this message and show them that there is this potential. Actually, we can grow them. So now it's a matter of what things we need to improve, especially in terms of processing, post-harvesting, and the harvest techniques. That's the major things we need to look at. What kind of things we need to do in terms of processing in the UK and the harvest techniques. That's the things we need to look at and reflect on. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good point. Well, and I think that one of the things is that there's another side, isn't there, to these agronomic benefits. Buckwheat, for instance, because it's so long flowering.
Yeah.
As far as pollinators are concerned, it's fantastic, isn't it? And it provides cover. But the late harvest means the farmers are biting their nails off, just worrying that they're going to get everything in. This year in particular, our farmers have found very, very trying. To say the least. I will give a shout out at that point to Mark Lee. He was thinking of getting a mill anyway. So Mark Lee is an organic farmer based in Shropshire who's growing buckwheat for hominy dods. He's growing Carlin peas for hominy dods. He's got oats, which go through organic arable to whites, which is a big oat mill in reasonable sized oat mill in Northern Ireland. And he's also going to get a mill because he's growing all these different varieties of wheat, tall ones, short ones, composite ones, all sorts. And this year was so horrendous for him that him and Liz have decided now they're going to do it. So they've ordered some millstones, which is very exciting for me because I live down the road. So that's excellent. But it's taken Mark years, as I'm sure Andrew would attest to as well, to build your knowledge and to build your trading relationships. So I suppose if we were to look at everything, how do we get more knowledge sharing? For instance, Rod Everett, who's over on the west side of Northern England, has asked, would any of these grains be suitable for the Northwest? I suppose to some extent it's suck it and see, but where would you get the seed even if you were interested in trialling it? Andrew, can I put that to you? Where do people get seed for some of these perhaps lesser known cereals?
Was he asking about buckwheat and quinoa or the sort of...
I don't know. Rod, were you thinking particularly on any types of grains or just generally?
Just generally, really. Just I've wondered if there's sort of way Q might work, or just generally what might have a better chance of growing in the Northwest. Okay,
my own background is that I grew up in the Northwest. My first farming job was on the Fylde coast, and when my trips down the M6 to my parents before lockdown, I would see ever increasing numbers of pasture land being ploughed up and sown as dairy farms convert. So in answer to your question, yes, if cereals grow in Shropshire and you can grow them up with us, well, you kind of sit in between in the Northwest, yes is the answer. Of course you can grow them. If other cereals grow in neighbouring farms, the most important thing for the success of these cereals are your soils, really. I mean, that goes without saying. But where you get these seeds, depending on what you're interested in growing, various sources. The YQ is definitely being pushed by Organic Research Centre. They're the go-to organisation to point you in the direction of seed manufacture, seed multiplication for YQ.
I think on that one is they've passed it on to Walnes, WALNES. I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, and Gemma Cope at Cope Seeds. I've done a lot of work with her over the last 3 or 4 years, bringing in alternative wheat varieties, heritage ones from plant breeders, who are putting the sort of vintage and classic style of cereals into their breeding program to get a heritage wheat with a really good provenance that it actually is very well suited for modern organic farming conditions. So much better disease resistance, much better nutrient uptake, grain hardness, which is a key factor for milling quality of stones. Gemma's brought in 2 or 3 varieties from Austria, which I helped to assess and develop. In fact, we grow them extensively. And I've often had questions from farmers from Ireland, wherever, up in this neck of the woods, saying, you know, what can I grow? And the Edelman, Ehrgold, Austrian varieties do very well. The population wheats do very well. We're bulking up those on farm now that we've got from the US and Germany. So I will make those available next year from our population crops. So yeah, definitely a lot out there. But you know, do email me if there's something specific you're thinking of.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I've just put a couple of links in the chat for Copes and also for Walnes.
Yeah, I also, this is an interesting, I think Miriam kind of hinted at some of the, in terms of seed availability too, yeah, as Andrew's saying, there's a range in what's available, but also, so like with the spelt that we grew commercially with Coastal Grains, as much as I had just done this project where we had this information, yep, Oberkummer rot corn is the one, it's great, cool. The main seed that's available is Zollenspelt, which is not a pure spelt line. So to do it commercially with more farmers with access to seed, like that's the main seed that's available. And as Andrew said, Cope Seeds is doing some work to get some different varieties to become available for spelt. But as we're getting that information from Eastern Europe, the main uptake tends to be the ones that are like as close to what farmers are already doing as possible. So that's what, like the Zollenspelt isn't too tall. So it's not going to freak people out too much. Like there are still some growers I've worked with who are like, gosh, it's so tall, and they want the PGRs at it. They're like, no, relax. Like, it's supposed to be like that. But yeah, in terms of seed availability, that was an interesting transition for me from like the research side to more of a commercial side. I couldn't take these varieties that I'd just been looking at and say, yeah, let's grow these. It had to be the varieties that were commercially available. And with spelt, the ones that are being grown more are ones that have been intertwined with wheat more recently. But I hope over time, once growers are kind of used to the idea of it, they'll be more open-minded to different variety choice. But sorry, that was just a note.
Well, actually, Amelia, the thing that I really despair at with the plant breeding in Germany that brought Zollenspelts and a number of others into the fore is that without asking the customer, they just said, what do we need to do to improve yield and processing? And because they're genetically the same, wheat and spelt, they can cross them. Some look like spelt, some look like wheat. Take the ones that look like spelt, they're reduced in height, they have a much better yield capacity, easier threshing, but we're losing nutritional delivery. And the message that came out from yesterday's discussion through the Sustainable Food Trust is that we really need to start to need thinking about pulling away from yield at all cost and look at quality at all cost. And if nutritional density is not a marker of the value of a crop, then heaven help us, we're not going to feed ourselves in the decades ahead by focusing on this yield component, this commercial aspect that has driven farming for the last 30 years. That's, you know, the biggest problem in the world is malnutrition. You know, it's 9 million people are undernourished, and yet the biggest crops that we grow in the world are cereals. So we're not doing ourselves a favour by continuing that down this route. Anyway, rant over.
No, well, I agree. And one of the things that I'm finding myself saying more and more these days is the reason that yield is not working for us is that 850,000 people are starving today and 2 billion people are overweight. All of them are malnourished.
Yeah.
So we have some big problems. And I hasten to add that that's not all in the British Isles, but we don't get off scot-free. 2/3 of British adults are overweight and 1/3 growing to 1/4 of our children. So I do think we've got some big nuts to crack. One of the things, considering that we've got just less than 15 minutes, we haven't talked much about participatory research. I know it's something that Amelia, Israel, and Andrew is close to your heart. What is it, and what's the point? Amelia, what is participatory research?
Yeah, so participatory research on the agriculture side can mean different things to different people. Ultimately, it's trials on farm. With the Healthy Miner Cereals project, that was very much a top-down approach. So a funding bid had been written for this big EU project. It'd be great to actually try the varieties on farms. So let's write in that we're going to do a farmer participatory trial and we'll figure it out. But what that means is what you have to do is you have to go to farmers and say, hi, I need to grow these very specific varieties in a way where I can set up a statistically robust experimental design. Let's figure this out. And really what they want to do is say, oh, give me the seed and I'll sow a field for you. And you can like come look at it a few times, which is great as a way to uptake different crops. But if you want to have data for a robust peer-reviewed paper, you really need to try to control as much as you can. So what we did was 100-meter strip plots that were a drill width, so farmers drilled it themselves, but then we had to use a plot combine from the university to try to harvest it, and we ran into a lot of trouble there. Combines break, and then had to try to use other combines, and then if you're trying to measure the exact yield from a 100-meter strip, you have to pause and like weigh things, and you're definitely not going to get as exact so there are different ways of doing it depending on what you want your outcome to be. And I have now been initially introduced to the idea of the research-driven side is much more difficult to actually engage farmers in what's actually happening, because it's very much like, we need this to look a certain way because we need data from it. Whereas what we did with Coastal Grains was very much a commercial focus. And we probably could have done some more actual research, to be honest. It is tricky, and I think there's other people in the call who have done some work with different farms. I know, looking at the live seeds information that's being shared in the chat, it's not difficult to get different things growing on different farms. There are farmers that are really interested in this, but sometimes it butts head with a research approach in terms of like needing statistically robust data. But there's really great examples of different collaboration with farmer that is way more of a collaboration of asking farmers. Field labs are a great example of that as well. Asking farmers what they actually want to do. And to some extent, that's what the knowledge transfer partnership was. The growers wanted to find some commercial opportunities for these things. But yeah, the outcomes were far more commercial than anything we did within the Healthy Miner Cereals project. That felt a bit rambly. If there are specific questions out of that ramble, we can go in that direction. But those are my scattered thoughts.
That was very good. That was very good scattered thoughts. Anybody want to pick up anything on those scattered thoughts? I thought they were good. They weren't just scattered. I put some links in there of short videos, 12 minutes long, that I took of the Organic Research Centre dangerous duo of Dominic Amos and Ambrosio Costanzo visiting Mark and going through some of his crops. And Mark did a walk in the wheat last year. This year he did it virtually, and I've put a link there. Some of you have been asking about which varieties to try. Mark takes you on a walk through, I can't remember, a dozen, I think. So it's interesting. Let's also, just before we go, can I ask, and this is probably for Andrew, the pandemic caused all sorts of interruptions to supply. So looking at building links, etc., how did Gilchesters fare during the early, middle and whatever bit of the pandemic this is?
Well, firstly, I'm 2 stone lighter.
It was hard work.
Oh God, we worked our socks off. God, yeah. In the from the 16th to the 25th of March, the Mintel data has now come through. So in that week running up to lockdown, an extra 2.1 million people bought 1 bag of flour in the supermarkets. From the 25th of March to the 6th of April, an extra 4.4 million people bought 1 bag of flour. The system completely collapsed because of the 40 million tons of cereals that we grow annually, and which on paper we're self-sufficient in our cereals, although actually we export it and buy in the cereals we need. We only mill about 190,000 tons into 1.5 or retail bags, mostly on the supermarket. So anyone that could produce a 1.5 or 3 kilo bag of flour had their work cut out to fill that. So we didn't have a flour shortage. We just had a lack of production capacity to resupply that supermarket stock of small bags, of small retail bags of flour. So any of us that had a bagging machine, our work was cut out. So we lost our customer base of restaurants and hotels and a few artisan bakeries the moment lockdown happened. But as that demand fell away, it was met overnight, literally, by the home baker lockdown saying we need supplying directly. And 9 minutes of our website being open, 9 minutes of trading time gave us a week and a half's worth of packaging. It was absolutely nuts. And it was actually frightening picking up the phone and listening to customers or potential customers in London in particular saying, please, you have to supply us. We're desperate. We're locked in. And it was a sort of Armageddon scenario. It sounded like, and that was a real driver for us to say, come on, knuckle down. I lost 3 millers in the first week due to self-isolating and their own stupidity. And so it was me and my wife, my mill manager and my daughter, and we just cracked on. And it was exhausting, but it was so rewarding. And the thing that came out of it for me personally was the number of people who contacted us initially and said, you're local, we're local, you have to supply us because we're local. And that sense of fear and aggression that was in there, you have to supply me, over the period of lockdown, when things calmed down, we got the thank you so much for supplying us, got our package from you. I can't believe we got it in 2 days. Thank you so much. And my continued message, other than to say it was our pleasure, particularly to the local ones, when I was asked on the BBC on the radio, what the difference to us as a local producer was, I said, please, 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 and this goes to every single local producer, wherever you live in the country, we're not just here for emergencies. We are here day after day, trying to make our lives work, trying to trade off the farm, with short food miles, with highly nutritious, highly valuable food products. Please, if you need us in an emergency, change your trade, change your buying habits and buy from us every day, every week, every month, whatever your habits are. Use us locally often, and then we're always here. But if we're only here in emergencies, I'm afraid some of us aren't going to be here anymore because the market's so tough otherwise. And that was an eye-opener, I think, for a lot of customers. And we saw a 700% increase in sales during lockdown, and that's pared down to about 200% up on last year. So we've retained a really valuable additional share of the market through being able to supply direct. And I apologize to my customers today because my internet's turned off and my phone's turned off. I will get to you at the end of this session. So yeah, that's our experience. And it was a rewarding one.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Well, I didn't introduce myself, and it's now at the end, but I'm Stephen Jacobs. I'm the Business Development Manager for Organic Farmers and Growers. We certify organic land, certify just over half the organic land in the country. And we also work with other food businesses. And my experience from what other people are telling me matches what you said, Andrew. Absolutely.
Yeah.
People working their socks off, losing, I think you were saying when we were speaking earlier, some of the big volume trade initially, but then picking up this smaller trade, which is a different approach, slightly different techniques, including lots of patience and clear messaging. 3 minutes to go, 2.5. Do you guys want to sum up? Israel, Amelia, Andrew, any last thoughts?
I would just say in general, I know there's been chats about things to try. And yeah, honestly, from my experience, I do think Spelt is something that certainly the opportunities to sell it and find a market for it in the UK is getting increasingly well established. And it's not just centered in the South as it was previously, like Craggs & Co. is working with it. Gilchesters obviously is working with it. So there are more opportunities there. And I guess the other thing to maybe plug, which I don't know if you were going to do this, Stephen, but there is a session on just like networking in the North, especially the farming and the food system community. So just want to, parts of this conversation will definitely continue on Thursday afternoon in that session.
I just put the link in there. So there we go. Yes, you'll probably see the same faces again. Thank you. Israel, anything further to add? Sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, my takeaway message would be that we need to start as a nation really giving a greater consideration to nutrient density of our foods and sourcing and supplying and manufacturing of those grains and other food sources on a nutritional basis. Albrecht, who is the soil scientist from America, who is my great hero, he famously said, all food is reconstituted soil, and you can't get good food from bad soil. And really, that's, for me, he wrote that in the 30s, 1930s, and it holds so true, I think truer now than ever before. And I hope through local networking, we can really open people's eyes to the nutritional value of what they should be buying and eating. Yeah, but thank you for listening, everybody. It's been a real privilege.
That was excellent, thank you. And as I think Rhys said when we spoke to him before, use it or you'll lose it.
Yeah,
you like to do it.
So that quite a few.
I
think that's somebody's mic accidentally on. There's quite a few links in the chat if people want to hoover those up before we close. But otherwise, thanks everybody. I enjoyed that very much.
Likewise. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you all. Anybody interested will be here on Thursday at 1:30, I think it is, to go into food networks. So we won't just be concentrating so much on grain, but we will be concentrating.
Fantastic.